Welcome back from lunch, everyone. My name's Melissa Forbes and I'm the chair of the health session this afternoon. Like I said, we've got a bit of a packed schedule, so we're going to get straight into it. And our first presenter today is Leah Chrisp, and she's from James Cook University, presenting on music listening for maternal wellbeing during pregnancy and labour. So I'll hand it over to you, Leah. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I am Leah Chrisp and I'm currently in my first year completing the Master of Clinical Psychology course at James Cook University in Townsville, North Queensland. A course requirement is to complete a thesis, and with the help of my supervisor, Dr. Amanda Krause, and PhD student Kayla Hutter, I'm investigating music listening for maternal wellbeing during pregnancy and labour through a scoping review. And it didn't change, hold on. Why did that not work? There we go, sorry about that. The aim of the scoping review is to consolidate evidence-based knowledge on the role of music listening for maternal wellbeing during the prenatal and delivery periods. Preliminary search results suggest that listening to music is effective in reducing the expectant mother's stress, anxiety, and depression levels, both during pregnancy and birth. Music listening has shown to improve a mother's sleep quality and is associated with an increase in maternal-infant bonding and maternal self-efficacy. And music listening during the prenatal period decreases an expected mother's risk of developing postnatal depression. The importance of a scoping review is that 1 in 5 Australian mothers are affected by perinatal anxiety and depression, which costs Australia $877 million in productivity costs, health costs, social and wellbeing impacts. For expectant mothers, the transition period can be characterised by varying degrees of psychological distress, which can negatively impact maternal-infant bonding, family relationships, infant development, and the mother's functional ability, as well as her well-being. Inadequate support for mothers during the perinatal period due to limited support from health services, financial barriers to paid services, and limited accessibility for those who reside in rural and remote areas increases the risk of psychological distress. Addressing the factors which are leading to psychological distress includes a lack of social support and has the potential to prevent the onset of postpartum mental health disorders. Our scoping review is a side project to an overall larger project happening at JCU University called Bamboo. Bamboo is a peer volunteer support program for expected first-time Australian mothers. And it's aimed at providing high-quality social support to decrease postpartum psychological distress. A goal of the scoping review is to assist in developing resources and information which will be provided on Bamboo's website or app. Ultimately, our focus is on the mother and her journey through pregnancy, as researchers primarily previously focused on the infant, particularly during their stay at the neonatal intensive care unit. There is significant amounts of research to support music listening in NICU as an effective nursing intervention. Our research question asks, what does the published research tell us about the influence of music on mothers' well-being during the perinatal period? Our scoping review aims to provide a preliminary assessment of the available literature to identify research evidence following the PRISMA extension for scoping reviews methodology. Eligibility criteria will include females in the perinatal period right up until birth, and music listening as the intervention. Search terms are currently in the process of being refined to accurately capture eligible literature, but it will likely be along the lines of music plus listen, perinatal, prenatal, pregnancy, labour and birth. The scoping review results have implications for developing a suite of online resources that will be available via an app and website. The results have implications for allied health providers, including healthcare professionals, music therapists, occupational therapists, psychologists, and counsellors. And there are implications for members of the community to potentially use the results to make informed decisions concerning their use of the developed resources to promote their own personal health and well-being. The goal is to include practical information as well as music-related activities that are easy to use. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you so much, Leah and Amanda. Thanks for that great presentation to kick off our health session. Next up, we have Stuart McFarlane. Stuart, I've made you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen there. Stuart is joining us from RMIT, is that correct?
That's correct. You can hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you fine, thank you. And Stuart is going to be discussing auditory countermeasures for sleep inertia.
Okay,
yes.
So I'm really happy to be here. This is my first conference with AMP, and due to COVID, I haven't had a chance yet to present my work over the last few years. So essentially what I've been looking at is auditory countermeasures for sleep inertia, which generally means the sounds that we use for waking, our alarm tones, do they have the capacity comparatively to improve our cognition during the period from transitioning from the waking state to a fully alert state. So what is sleep inertia? It's morning grogginess in its essence, but it is a measurable decline in human cognition that can last or has been shown to last up to 4 hours, but typically 15 to 30 minutes is more prevalent. The effects are measurable. Reaction time, accuracy, attention, complex decision-making have all been shown to be affected in this state. Now, if we consider real-world activities, it can be detrimental in many activities we take within that period after or upon and after waking. So jumping on your bike, riding to work within that 4-hour period, obviously behind the wheel of a car, and especially for personnel working in higher risk conditions. So if you're late for work, you scoot on site and you're on the tools, or you're operating heavy machinery, if you're in emergency services, it's becoming an increasing concern and an interest to the field of sleep science, because it has been shown that it is population-based. So a global population based of humans using alarms to wake up, if we can find or refine our knowledge to improve the signals and the quality of the signal, then it should potentially have flow-on benefits. So what are the precedents to my research? There was only one, and it was conducted by Hayashi in 2004, which tested napping, so a 20-minute nap followed by a test battery against no music or no sound, which was actually an intercom, so it's still an auditory signal, against what the researchers proposed, and they described that as excitative music. So the excitative music was more successful against the intercom, but also the participants had a preferred stimulus, described in the research as popular preferred music. Now, interestingly, and this refers back to the comment in the previous discussion, they did not supply the stimulus. So it is unknown what this preferred music is. Now, remember, it's a Japanese study, so we did refer back to the year 2004 to see what were the great hits of that period, and it varied substantially. There's a lot of ballads and there's a lot of pop, even tempo. There's a lot of slower downbeat tempos, which may be culturally relevant. So I thought, well, let's look deeper and let's look from a bottom-up scenario rather than top-down. So what I proposed was a questionnaire that blends or incorporates the sleep inertia questionnaire that is validated. So if you fill that out and you have a higher score, it's more than likely you are suffering from sleep inertia. We used that against 3 primary questions. Waking sound type as alarm tone, musical song, instrumental, natural sounds or radio. Does that affect or does that have a correlation or significance against sleep inertia? Subjective feelings towards the waking sound, i.e. very pleasant to very unpleasant on five tick scales, and that's again measured against sleep inertia. And then it's really based off Hayashi's study, where I wanted to deep a lot further into elemental factors of music. So do the participants perceive the melodicity, the rhythm, the tempo, pitch or loudness to have any influence on how they perceive sleep inertia? Now, the findings to the first 2 were insignificant. So we didn't have any effect against the waking sound type, which theoretically is a preference because they have set deliberately this alarm. There was no correlation between feelings and the sound, but there was, and a surprising result, that the perception of melody had a significant relationship to reductions in perceived sleep inertia. All right. That was completely unexpected. I would have expected tempo potentially, pitch and loudness. But although it was a surprise, when we further looked at the fundamentals of how you create melodicity or melodies, then if we consider the neuroscience behind how music can affect and modulate brain areas, then that starts to make sense against sleep inertia, because sleep inertia, from a physiology point of view, looks like it may be to cortical blood flow within the brain. Now, we know that music has the ability to mediate blood flow within the brain to certain regions. All right, so we followed this up with a secondary study, study 2, where we constructed a custom-made melody based on what we know for melody construction within the research. And then we conducted an ecological study with 2 test groups, one testing melodicity against a control, the other one testing rhythm against the control. An important factor here is that the melody and the rhythm, they both have the same rhythmic contour, but the rhythm doesn't have the melodic contour. The control was metronomic. That was also blended into the melodic and rhythmic stimulus as well. So you could actually tease them apart quite effectively. Based on the key of C, and that's derived by research also, we incorporated a key element called the psychomotor vigilance test. Now, this has been used to discover, from a psychometrics point of view, evidence of sleep inertia, with the main metrics being the mean reaction time, reaction speed, lapses in attention, false starts, and the performance score. Again, to our surprise, well, there was no correlation between the rhythm and control, which is kind of surprising because the way the rhythmic stimuli was formulated, I would have suspected an implied tempo increase and energy, but alas, no significance. However, indeed, the melody did improve vigilance via the metrics. And we can see the lapses is quite significant. The false starts and the performance scores are very significant. So taking these two studies together, the working hypothesis is that within the detail and best practice approaches for alarm sound design, we believe that the melodic construction of the composition is or could potentially be a major key factor for successful outcomes. For further reading, there's a number of publications where we discuss this. Thank you so much.
And next up, we have Genevieve Dingle from University of Queensland. And Genevieve's going to be presenting on a scoping review for how music activities affect health and wellbeing. So over to you, Jen. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Hopefully you can see those slides now. Yeah. Okay. So just going to move our pictures out of the way here. So yeah, this was a scoping review. You can see all of the participants there. So this was basically a team effort from the whole of the UQ Music, Dance and Health Research Group that we embarked upon just before COVID hit. And so it became quite a complicated team scoping review where we weren't actually seeing each other and meeting. But anyway, we managed to get through it, and it's published now. So that's the link there if anyone's interested. So I guess the idea here was that there's now quite a large and very rapidly growing body of research around engaging in particular types of music activities and sort of their potential benefits on different aspects of health and well-being. But most of these are only focusing on one specific activity, like we've heard in this session already, you know, things like music listening or say singing or instrumental music playing. But all of these seem to have different designs, different measures, different methods. And so it's quite hard to know, you know, to try and gather what is the current state of play with music, health and well-being across all of those, you know, a whole range of different types of musical activities. And that was really, I guess, the thing that inspired us to do a scoping review, because we wanted to know, well, how does that work? If we're finding some positive benefits from engaging in different activities, what are the psychosocial mechanisms that have been measured that might explain how the music activity is producing these effects? So this was a scoping review, as I said, with 9 different search engines, which are listed at the bottom there. This is the flow of the number of papers at each stage of the screening and reviewing process. So what you can see across the top of this table is how we grouped different music activities. So we're sort of thinking from the background or receptive music listening, where the listener didn't necessarily have any active choice or engagement, through to intentional listening, usually when they've chosen what they're listening to for a particular reason. More sort of audience shared music, so like watching a concert or live music, instrument playing, group singing, music to movement or dance, lyrics and rapping, right through to things like improvisation. So sort of an increasing amount of I guess, active musical engagement across that span, if you like. And so we actually divided the group of researchers who were, you know, a group of staff members from the uni from different disciplines, different schools, but also a number of undergrad and postgraduate students were involved as well. And so we subdivided into small groups or working parties. So each working party of around about, you know, 3 or 4 people was just looking at the literature on one of these musical activities. And as you can see, there were different numbers of papers that met our selection criteria for the different musical activities. And yeah, this is the final number that we had for full review at the bottom. So we ended up with 63 papers in the full review. We did apply some quality criteria to try and ensure that we were scoping the evidence from, I guess, reliable or better quality research. So for the quantitative studies, we looked at studies that had psychometrically validated measures of a health or wellbeing outcome and at least one process variable. We tried to pick ones that had at least 20 participants per condition. If there was a control or comparison condition, that the allocation was either randomized or at least some sort of baseline check was done to ensure that the different conditions were equivalent, and that assessors were independent of the people delivering or facilitating the musical group to avoid those demand characteristics of sort of wanting to please the person who's running the activity. And for the qualitative studies, we were looking for papers where they had some kind of description and explanation of the type of analysis, and some independence again between the facilitators of the study and the people who were actually analysing the transcripts of interviews or qualitative analysis. So in terms of results, this is sort of the summary table. So again, you can see the different musical activities across the top of the table, and then the psychosocial kind of mechanism variables down the side of the table. And then in the body of the table where you see the plus, that means that there was some evidence from the research that was reviewed for that particular mechanism. Where there's a plus and a minus, it means that there was some studies showed positive evidence, other studies showed no evidence, and where there was no studies or no evidence, there's just a blank space in the table. So, you know, I guess you can see that depending on the type of activity, different types of mechanisms seem to be at play, or at least were the focus of the assessments. So, for instance, physiological arousal tended to be measured more so in those hospital or clinical or post-operative type of environments where music listening was more likely to be the type of intervention. With emotion and mood, that actually came up across the board. So every single type of musical activity had positive effects on some kind of measure of emotional mood. Quite a few also had different cognitive effects. Going down the page a bit here, social connection was another quite common one that was measured across the board. And then there were some that perhaps weren't measured as much. So things like self-esteem or sense of achievement, personal identity or group identity. So they came up in some activities, but not so much in others. But that's the state of play in terms of the literature that met our selection criteria. So to conclude, although the field of music health and wellbeing requires further development, there is emerging evidence that specific music activities might be recommended for specific psychosocial purposes and for even specific health conditions in populations. And that, in fact, music activities offer a rich and underutilised resource for health and wellbeing to participants of diverse ages, backgrounds and settings. So that's... Oh, and so that's my contact, but also Elise Williams's contact, who's coordinating the UQ Music, Dance and Health Research Group. If anyone's interested, we have a webinar series that's relevant to this sort of work as well. Thank you.
Fantastic, Jen. Thank you so much, and congratulations for herding all of those cats. We'll move on to Scott now. Scott, if you want to bring up your slides. So we've got Scott Leimroth. He's joining us from University of Wollongong, and he's going to speak to us on the effect of rhythmic change in heart rate variability during music listening. So hand it over to you, Scott. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Scott Leimroth. My presentation's on the effect of rhythmic change on heart rate variability during music listening. Oh, why is that changing? Where am I? Okay. Cognition during music listening. Is that all okay? Everyone can see that screen? Yep. Okay, great. Cognition during music listening appears to influence heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is a beat-to-beat variation of the heartbeat over time and is considered an index of autonomic nervous system control of the heart via vagus nerve activity. Changes in HRV are induced by attention to relevant stimuli and inhibition of irrelevant stimuli. Common frequency domain measures of HRV include low frequency and high frequency, with low frequency HRV reflecting a mix between sympathetic and parasympathetic influences, and high frequency HRV primarily mediated by vagal innervation of the heart, reflecting parasympathetic nervous system activity.
Scott, can I just jump in? Your slides aren't moving on my screen. So
Okay.
do you want to just go into presentation mode?
Yep. Just find that.
You're still on the first slide on my screen. So
Okay, great. Yep. Okay, great. So a consistent finding is that HRV is reduced in response to sound presentation. HRV is also reported to decrease in response to exciting music compared to tranquilizing music, and unpleasant compared to pleasant music. However, results across studies are inconsistent. Most research uses known musical works as stimuli. Little is known about the impact that changes to specific musical elements have on HRV. However, rhythmic elements are considered the major determinants of physiological changes in response to music. Most stimuli involve confounds such as prior learning, emotional response, changes in multiple musical elements such as pitch, harmony, rhythm, timbre, and expression. So we assessed HRV as an index of cognition in response to musical change by varying a single musical element, rhythm. The next slide, yep. So we used two 32-second musical patterns. On the left, identical apart from a single rhythmic change, a syncopation, which is outlined in the red square, to compose two music stimuli. Music A involving less repetitions of the change pattern, and music B involving more repetitions of the change pattern. I'll now play to you the bars 9 through 12 of the no change and change patterns to demonstrate the rhythm change. So if you just click on that little thing, it'll play the first. Great, and then with the rhythm change. Okay, next slide.
oops. Okay. There we go.
Right. 35 participants completed the musical contour and rhythm recognition subscales of the Montreal Battery of Evaluation of Amusia. While seated with eyes open, HRV was recorded for 3 minutes during each of 3 conditions: rest, passive listening to music A and music B. Low frequency and high frequency HRV were derived using QBIOS HRV software. Repeated measures manovers compared HRV during rest versus music listening and during music A versus music B. Correlations examined associations between MBEA scores and the relative difference in HRV between the stimuli. Next slide. Our results show that high frequency heart rate variability was significantly lower during music listening compared to rest, with no significant difference in low frequency heart rate variability. Next slide. High frequency HRV was significantly lower during the more change B stimulus compared to the less change A stimulus. Low frequency HRV showed no significant difference. The next slide. The correlation between MBA rhythm scores and the difference in high frequency HRV between the stimuli was significant. The relative difference in high frequency HRV between the stimuli increased as MBA rhythm score increased. The relationship between these measures accounted for around 12% of the variance in the data. And the next slide. In summary, we found significant changes in high frequency heart rate variability in response to music and musical change, and correlation between music listening ability and HRV response. This supports the assumptions of the neurovisceral integration theory, which suggests that cognitive processing related to arousal results in vagal withdrawal, producing reduced high frequency HRV. The correlation between the MBEA rhythm score and the relative difference in HRV supports the suggestion that those with greater rhythmic processing ability recruit more neurons when processing music, leading to changes in HRV. The correlation with rhythmic score, but not melodic contour score, supports the assumption of the modularity of musical processing. Our study is the first we're aware of to find a correlation between the music listening ability of non-musicians and HRV response. Thank you for listening. Happy to take any questions you have.
Great work.
Thank you. Yeah, great work. Thank you so much, Scott, for that.
Thanks.
And yeah, really interesting stuff. And good to have some cross-pollination between our presentations. So nice programming there from the organisers. Our final session, I think we're up to our final session. This time it's just flown by. We have Gemma Perry. Gemma is from Macquarie University, and she will be presenting on mindfulness, mysticism and mantra, how chanting contributes to cognitive benefits, altered states and quality of life. So over to you, Gemma.
Okay, everyone can hear me, everyone can see slides?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, my name is Gemma, and I have been working on the effects of chanting for my honours, my master's, and then recently my PhD. So I'm presenting on some of the PhD research today. So first of all, chanting is really widely spread. It's basically in every culture and tradition around the world, and has been historically as well. It can be done in many different ways. So you can see here there's sometimes there's musical instruments involved, sometimes it's just voice. It can be done in groups. It can be done vocally, and it can also be done like just as a mental repetition. There's ceremony involved in Indigenous Australian traditions. They use chanting to navigate the land and connect with country. So there's all sorts of different ways to chant. I'm talking about a survey that we did on experienced chanters, and these people had been chanting on an average about 10 years, but anything from 1 month up to 60 years. And we had 456 experienced chanters across 32 different countries that were involved in the survey. And we asked them about the chanting practices that they did, whether it was vocal, silent, individual, in a group, and also we asked about that chanting tradition. And we also asked about the experiences that they were having during chanting. Specifically, we looked at altered states of consciousness. Mostly we focused on positive experiences, things like flow, mystical experience. So a sort of sense of merging with either the environment or the activity or another person, sense of unity often reported in these altered states. And we also looked at cognitive impact like mindfulness and mind wandering. So the mystical states, we found across these 9 different traditions that regardless of the tradition that people were engaged with, around 60% of people were reporting to have these mystical experiences. So a sense of unity with the environment, peace, oneness, that kind of thing. And we also found that if they were high on certain characteristics like absorption, altruism, and religiosity, they were more likely to have or report these mystical states. The other thing that we were interested in was how aspects of chanting were impacting the altered states or cognition, and then how in turn those were impacting quality of life. So we did do regressions to look at aspects of chanting directly on quality of life. But then we wanted to do this exploratory path analysis to see if it was actually going through the altered states and cognitive effects. So on the left, we have engagement. So people reported on experience, how long they were chanting for, how regularly they were chanting, and then focus. And this was like what they were focusing on when they were chanting. So in some traditions, sound is very important. So they're very focused on articulation and pronunciation. In other traditions, devotion is very important. So it doesn't matter what sounds they're making, although they do make particular sounds, they are surrendering to something greater as they're chanting. And intention. So it can be religious or non-religious. It could be a health intention. They could just be thinking, I'm chanting to increase some kind of mental health or anything like that. It could be compassion for the world, could be peace, just having any particular intention when they chant. And so we can see that different things are related to flow, mystical experience, and then mindfulness and mind wandering, and that's indirectly impacting quality of life. So that's all I'm reporting on today. Here are three of the magical people that were involved in this. So Bill Thompson and Vince Polito I've been working with since my honours, and then Narayan Shankaran was also involved in this particular paper. So thank you so much. I'd love to hear your thoughts or any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Gemma, and congratulations on all your work. And I believe you're Dr. Perry now, is that correct?
I am officially Dr. Perry now, yes.
I would like to thank Leah today, and Stuart, Jen, Scott, and of course Gemma for your wonderful presentations. Could you all join me in a round of a virtual applause for our presenters today? Great session, everyone.